Hello and welcome to Kriegieland, our continuing series of videotapes dedicated to documenting the experiences of ex-POWs. My name is Chris Breitling and I'm a video producer for the Aerospace Network. And today I'm again substituting for our normal host, Elmer Lian, because he is going to be the subject of our interview. We're going to pick up where we left off last time. We covered a lot of ground. We got in some of your background, some of your earlier experiences in the war and how you were shot down and captured, and we basically had just gotten you into the camp, and that was where we had to leave off last time. So we'd like to this time get into a little more of your the specifics of your experience and go into the details of what camp life was like. Now, before I start into that, I'd like to go back a little bit, and we have this picture of you that was taken when you were interrogated or at the interrogation center, and I wonder if we could show that briefly for a moment. There it is. You see that on the monitor? Now, something that strikes me when I look at that picture is the expression on your face. And I'm saying to myself, that really doesn't look like a guy who's just been shot down and captured by the Germans. I think especially in the frontal view, you've almost got what, or maybe I'm reading into this, what almost looks like a little bit of a half smile on your face, like you've got some little private joke going on. I was wondering if you could maybe take yourself back and tell us sort of what was going through your mind as this picture was being taken.
Well, the picture was taken about, say about 4 days. 4 days or 5 days after I was shot down. And this was taken at the interrogation center. Mm-hmm. Now, the interrogation center was a large, complex center, much like a reception center here in the United States. You go in one door, there'd be hundreds of prisoners. You go in one door, then you walk in, and then first thing they do, they check you over for physical damage and so on, mm-hmm. And then they have you write your name. They give you a postcard. Then they weigh you, see how tall you are. Then you move into another room, and there's where the picture was taken. Mm-hmm. In that next room, they just line you up and put a card on you, take a picture. Then you move into the next place, and they give you what they call a dog tag or a metal tag with, mine was 6135. That was the number of my tag.
Can you remember sort of what your state of mind was as you were going through this process?
Well, I'll tell you that those 3-4 days before that were tough, mm-hmm. And I was glad that I was at a place where I had other prisoners around, and the German Air Force was in charge of this camp, mm-hmm. This interrogation camp. So I felt fairly secure for the first time. Up until now, I didn't know whether I was going to be killed or not. Oh. Because the civilians were pretty mad at you, and people were pointing rifles at you, and you were marching perhaps at dark at night and things like that through woods, and I didn't know if I'd make it or not. And then they were bombing these places where I was at, but I felt fairly secure when I got to this interrogation center. Oh, okay. So I felt pretty good.
Maybe that explains a little bit of your expression there. Okay, well, they did back up a little bit there, but let's get you to prison camp in Barth. We just basically got there, so maybe we can start right at the beginning as you're arriving in camp, and we'll go over some of the material again, but we'll just sort of work into it. You remember some of your initial impressions as you walked into camp, as you were brought in to Stalag Luft I?
Well, the first impression that I got, and it always remained with me, and it just scares me when I think of it, as I walked from that small town of Barth, town about the size of Grand Forks or so, walked towards the camp about 2 miles away, I saw that great big swastika flying above the camp. I mean, there was a flag perhaps about 8 by 12 or so, and I'd never seen a flag that big in my life, mm-hmm. And I'd never seen the swastika. And the problem was, I didn't know how to react to it. I mean, I was filled with an emotion that I'd never had before in my life when I saw that flag. And of course,
what do you suppose that was?
What?
What do you suppose that emotion was if you had to put a name to it?
Well, it was just an unknown one. In fact, that was one of the things that I noticed going into prison camp, especially in prison camp, prisoner of war. I ran into situations where I'd never met, had never met a situation like this in my life before, and I didn't know how I should respond. I didn't know whether I should cry or laugh, get mad, or be stoic about it. It was a situation where I'd never I couldn't associate with some emotion I had in the past. Now this may seem rather academic, but that was true.
Oh,
so,
definitely.
but I accepted the flag after a while. I mean, you know, I knew I was in a foreign country. I knew I was under the jurisdiction of the Germans, and I accepted it. That's one thing as a prisoner of war. You never have to decide anything. Everything is decided for you. You're just like a baby.
Once you were brought into camp, you were assigned quarters, or what was the process?
Well, I come in there with, I suppose, about 100 men. And as we come in, the Germans and the Americans at a desk there, they had a layout of the camp, essentially, and they assigned where the new men would go. They just, as you come to this little desk, they'd say, well, you go to what they call block, we call them barracks here, barracks 7, room 9. And they'd give you a little slip of paper, so then when you left there, you'd know that's where you're going to go. So I was, where I went, block 9 was where I went to, barracks number 9, room 9, actually. And there was 23 men in there, and there were 2 more of us assigned. Robert Pierce, Bombardier, and myself, we went to that room. The other crew members or other POWs, they went to other rooms. See?
Were there any members of the flight crew that you'd been shot down with that were also at that camp?
Yes. The officers were all there. They had we had 3 navigators, they were there. Bombardier was there, co-pilot, pilot, command pilot, and so on. They were all the officers were there at that camp. Stalag Luft I.
Were you roomed together with any of them, or you were
No, they went to
split up?
different places. The major we had with us, he was the command pilot. He went to a special building where they had majors and colonels and full colonels. And the rest of us were just assigned at random.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that you were given some responsibilities as a prisoner because of your rank. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, when we come to this, when I was assigned to this block, I use the term block, it's really a barracks. The good friend, the pilot with me, he was a senior pilot, and he knew quite a few of the colonels in camp from way back in the States years before. And he was assigned as a block commander. And I worked with him all the time. I was his co-pilot on some of these missions, and he wanted me with him. So he made me the adjutant, or what's called administrative officer. So it is my job to keep track of all the men in this 250 officers in this building, who was in what room and so on. And their rank, serial number, and so on. And if they moved out or come in or went someplace, I had to keep track of this. I kept track of it for the Germans and for the Americans.
You kept track of it for the Germans, too?
Yes.
Would you have to submit some kind of reports to them, or?
Well, no. They would count these men about once every 2 weeks. The Germans would come at night, about 6 of them, or maybe 10. Unknown, they'd come to this building, barracks we'll say, and they'd walk in, and they would put a German guard at each door. And then they'd put Germans in the hallway. And then they'd come to each room, and in the room, they'd come with a file. And that file would be a 3x5 card file of all the men in that room. So that picture that you saw earlier, they had that on the card. So the Germans then would be about 3 of them in the room there. They would go through the card. They'd pick out the card, and they would read the number, and then you would answer.
Oh.
And they would check the picture against you and the number. And they went through all the rooms that way, so they checked about every 2 weeks. They checked every man by number, by card, and so on. So they had kept good track. And then they had roll call twice a day. Now they had the roll call. A lot of these guards were pretty old. I mean, they were pretty feeble, and maybe they weren't fighters, you know. And this one poor guard, he was guarding. He had to count the guys in my barracks that were sick and so on. So he'd come in there, and I kind of knew the guy. He was pretty decrepit. He was, you know, see, the Germans were worse off than we were. I mean, they knew. I knew the war was going to end. I was going to get back to the States. The German, he didn't know what was going to happen to him. So I'd kid him once in a while, and so forth. And one time I played a joke on him. I've always regretted it. I told him that, see, I knew a lot more about the war than he did. So he looked up to me. See, he always asked me how the war was going and who was who, because he knew that I knew. So I told him that the order had come down to the camp that all the guards were going to be replaced by some other guards, and the guards that were in camp now were going to the Russian front. And that poor guy, he just turned white. He thought, you know, that's the death sentence, see. And he just turned white, and he started crying and crying just as bad as he could. So I tried to tell him that I was kidding him, see. But it's so logical, you see, that he was going to be sent to the front and be killed. And he just, for several days he was sick about that. But I guess he finally got over it.
Guess you didn't joke about that after there, huh?
Oh, that was a bad joke. I played a bad joke on that guy. You know, the guy was innocent to start with.
You know, something I was thinking is if you could maybe walk us through what a typical day, and I don't know if there is such a thing as a typical day in a prison camp, but if you could sort of describe from the time you get up in the morning till the time you go to bed at night, what the usual run of the day would be for the Kriegies or prisoners.
Well, where I was at there, that at about 8 o'clock in the morning, summer or winter, they had a bugle. I'm not sure who was playing this bugle, but they played this bugle at about 7:45. And then that meant a roll call. And then in the barracks, they hollered, everybody up, everybody up, everybody up. The barracks commander now would have to go through all the rooms and tell everybody, roll call. And then at about...
Get a photograph there right now of the roll call.
Yeah, that's right, they're standing there in rows. They're usually about four rows, and the Germans would count down there, and they had a pad there, and they write down how many were there. Usually the roll call was quite accurate. The problem was, you see, it was easy to screw up the roll call. All you have to do is shift your position. But then you had to stay there until they got it right. Now, if you can imagine standing outside in the snow in the wintertime with no overshoes on and freezing feet, you were as interested in getting a right roll call as the Germans were. I mean, be foolish to screw up the roll call because they just make you stand there. And then after the roll call in the morning, then you went back to your room. Now, there was no heat in the barracks, by the way, or the block. So, but sometimes a guy, see, they had some rations there, but many times a guy would save half a slice of bread, of this German bread. And he'd save that, and he'd eat that in the morning.
That would be his previous day's rations?
Well, he'd have that from the previous day or maybe 2 or 3 days before.
Saved it for a while.
Each prisoner kind of kept a little bit of food, see, in a box for emergency like that, which was emergency. I mean, then after he ate that there, many times the guys would go back to bed, these sacks, and just lay in. But a lot of times they'd get up and they'd walk around, and a lot of them would visit. In other words, if I knew that a crew member of mine lived in about another barracks down, I'd go over there and go and visit with him for half an hour. And some of these guys would play cards. So they wasn't very good cards because they didn't have cards like, you know, they'd have to cut it out of paper, see. And so they'd play rummy and all kinds of junk games, you know, just to keep occupied. And they had a library there. It wasn't a very good library, but some old history books and things the Germans had thrown away. They were English. So someone would go over there and they'd read these books. They'd sit and read these books in the daytime. We also had tobacco, so they'd smoke. They'd talk about food a lot. You know, what how much food they're going to eat when they got back. And some would walk around. If it was a nice day, sometimes they'd walk a little bit around the camp. You don't walk too much because, you know, it expends energy. Then, around noon, when you're supposed to have so-called dinner or whatever it is, of course, what usually wasn't anything, so I mean, just forgot about that, just kept on going. But you knew there'd be usually soup in the evening. At about 3:30, you know, during the daytime, the guys would visit with each other, and they'd wash clothes. That's one thing. I know this Ainsworth from Texas. He was a navigator, by the way, and guys, some of the guys like, you know, they got a fetish about clothes. They want to keep clothes clean, so they wash them. This guy, he had a pail. Mm-hmm. You know, ordinary, about a 3-gallon pail. I don't know where he got it. And then they made these stomper out of a can, tin can like that, cut holes in it, put a stick on it, and then they put the soap, if they had it, water, this, and they'd stomp these clothes. And he put his white shorts and his T-shirt, it was white, and his OD pants and OD shirt all in this pail, and he'd stomp that thing for hours at a time. And I remember I told him, "Kid, that's an awful way to wash clothes. I mean, you can't, you shouldn't, you separate them." And he got mad as the dickens at me. He said, "I've washed clothes for my mother for years and years. I know more about washing clothes than anyone else around here." Of course, everything turned out the same color. He didn't, of course, he didn't know the difference.
So even if you're just washing with a pail and a stick, you still have to separate your colors from your whites. Huh?
Yeah. And then there'd be a guy come around, he'd be cutting, they'd have to have a scissor, you know, there's one scissor would go from one barracks to another, so then it'd finally get to your room, and then of course you'd have to take turns cutting your hair.
Now, was that something the Germans allowed you to have, a scissor, or was that?
Yeah, that Germans allowed us to have that scissor. Now that scissor was controlled by what we call the wheels. That's what the colonels and so on in their barracks, they had that. So they'd ration that out, that scissor. Well, there might have been a couple scissors, but maybe only one. Then that would go from room to room. Then maybe today they found out that there's lice in the place. So then this order goes out that everybody has to cut all their hair off, all their parts of the body, all the hair. So that was a big circus. Gad, I tell you, those guys were those scissors, you see. And then everybody was cussing and swearing the Germans. They'd cut all the hair off, and then they had a can of kerosene they passed around from room to room, and then you had to wash your head in kerosene, you know, to kill the lice, and wash all your body parts. You had sometimes between your legs, you see, if you'd cut with a scissor, so it was bleeding, and then you washed that with kerosene. Gad, the guy would jump up and down and swear at those Germans, and everyone else was laughing. It did like almost like a show, you know. Mm-hmm. But then they'd get over it and then go on to something else, some other problem. Then maybe the problem would come, well, going to be a water shortage. The pump where they got the water is going to be cut off tomorrow. Then everybody would scrounge around for cans and go with it. Then sometime during the day you'd go over to into the bathroom or latrine or washroom, whatever you call it, and they'd maybe wash their hands and face. That'd take just a few minutes, but there wasn't very much soap. And these, in this bathroom...
Got right there the picture.
Yeah, see that bathroom there, it was sort of an industrial type washer. And on top there, those spigots, they were on all the time. So there's water, about 6, 7, 8 spigots there, always running. Some guys washed their clothes in there, and some guys took a bath, and some guys washing their teeth, and some guys everybody tried to shave. I noticed that everybody tried to, they felt better shaving, and the Americans kind of made it a policy, told the guys to shave. Because about once a week, the American wheels would go around to all the barracks to see that they were fairly clean and the men looked good, see. And I know for their clothes, you know, to make them pressed, they always laid them on the floor or something and put some boards over, or laid them under the bed, see. Yeah, there were some of those guys, they had them pressed out just like new, put them under the mattress or something. But then, see, they were kind of proud of tried to do the best they could. Then they were interested in keeping the rooms clean. And Americans would come around about once a week and check your room to see that it looks pretty good, see. Then they'd go out and visit some more, and they didn't, where I was at, they had no games or anything. There was no balls or anything like that. But there was one interesting thing that happened in that camp where I was at. That there were some British guys in one place, and they told these Germans that for exercise, they like to exercise over a horse,
Pommel horse?
yeah, a pommel horse, you know, it sits out. So Germans thought these British were crazy anyway, so they let them build one of those things. See, out of some sticks and so it's kind of a, and then they threw their blankets over this thing, see? And they all gathered around all these British about this horse. And these British then would run and they'd jump on top of this horse or jump over it, see, and everybody would, all these Germans, British would clap. Germans thought they were just stark raving mad. But what they had done, they had dug a hole underneath the horse. And they were tunneling, see. They dug a hole underneath this horse, and then as they were tunneling, as they got the dirt up, they'd give it to the dirt as to these guys that were jumping over. See, and the guys would distribute the dirt over the camp, and as the tunnel, and they kept getting, the tunnel was longer and longer towards the gate. Well, they discovered the tunnel after.
Was there a lot of that kind of thing going on, tunneling, escape?
Well, where we were, no, because in the part of the camp where I was at, the buildings were built on stilts, about 5-foot stilts, so of course you couldn't tunnel. But in the older section of the camp, those guys were always tunneling, and I don't know why, but the camp was just rough because these tunnels would cave in and it was just rough. Then they'd start a new tunnel. I guess they just got some kind of delight out of trying to get through, build tunnels. They never escaped. You couldn't escape it. It's just too tough. But they tried to, at least, and the Germans had a good way of finding these tunnels. See, they had a long steel rod, stainless steel, about 6 foot, and they'd go around the camp and they'd push that thing down into the ground. And they hit the tunnel. You see, it'd go right down. So they knew it was a tunnel, so they'd dig it out and chase. And then they'd send the guys to the guardhouse, whoever they found there. Now, the guardhouse was fine. See, they always complained about the guardhouse, but the guardhouse had more food and heat. So
maybe that's why they kept tunneling.
So everybody wanted to go to the guardhouse, see, but you complained to the Germans, see, when they said, well, we're going to send you to the guardhouse. There's a tunnel there at Stalag Luft I. By the way, that was the only really successful tunnel that was made. There was about 50, most of them British. There was a couple of Norwegians and some French, couple Americans.
Yeah, the movie.
They went out that tunnel.
The Great Escape was
the
based
Great
on
Escape.
that
That's
story.
the Great Escape, yeah. And they didn't all get out there, but 50 of them got out, about. And they captured, I think they got them all. And I know they shot, they murdered, I think it was 25 when they first come. They lined them up and shot them right there in camp, 25 guys.
Yeah.
And then they, but that is the end of that. But there was lots of, there's just one tunnel, there were lots of tunnels there.
But no one, as far as you know, no one ever escaped from Stalag Luft I while you were there?
No, there was a rumor that a guy had escaped many years ago in a snowstorm when there was not a lot of snow and gone, but the trouble is, you could escape, but you couldn't get out of that place. I mean, it's always surrounded. But if they did escape, it'd be someone that was German. I mean, he's come from the United States, but he could speak German and so on. As far as I know, there was no one that escaped from Stalag Luft I. Now, they tell me that there were over 900 different ways that they tried to escape. Like, one was in the trash can. One was dressing up like Germans. One was running out the gate, or one was hollering fire in the barracks, and the Germans would run over there and see where the fire was, and then you see they'd try and sneak out. But no one escaped.
Getting back to our sort of day in the life of somewhere.
Well, little things like that would happen. Now, at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that bugle would sound, and then they'd all have to go back to the roll call. Everybody knew where they were supposed to stand and so on. And the barracks commander stood in front, and the German would count them and so on. And then there'd be a German with the and he would report to the camp commandant how many men there were in that formation. They'd add them up and see if they were all there. Then you'd go back. And then when you got back to the room, many times, then you get this soup. See, about that time, you issued this pail of soup. And that pail of soup is kind of odd. Like where I was at, I was given the job of getting the pail of soup. So I'd take this pail of soup and go over there and get it. And then when I come back to the room, they were all in the room now because they knew there was going to be food. So
they were waiting there for
they're waiting. And when I opened the door, or their door was open, and they'd all stand there and look at that soup. I mean, it just made me cry almost. You know, they'd crowd around me to look at the soup, how much soup there was in that pail. So then comes the problem of dividing it. Now, that's a son of a gun. See, when you get that many men, what you used to do is, see, there's the guy there dishing out the soup there. That's Americans made the soup. When the Germans made the soup, they didn't get it hot enough, or they didn't pay attention. They weren't too much interested in that detail. So when the Americans said, I'll take care of it, they were glad to get rid of the job. But then they'd line up there with pails. There's a pail on the ground there, and so that's their tank there.
Oh, I can see there in the background there's guys waiting, holding their buckets.
Yeah, and those tanks there were sort of war mess for when they were fighting the war. They dragged that along. That was sort of a kitchen. You see the top there of that boiler, the lid is up now. He's dishing out some soup there to these.
So it would be one pail or bucket per barrel?
Well, you'd tell how many men there were in that room, yeah. Some rooms maybe had 16 men, some would be 20, 25, so on. So that they'd approximate amount in that pail to correspond with the number of men in that room. So that's a pretty darn important job. I mean, that was the most important job in camp, actually, see. Because what they do then, you see, is everybody had a bowl, or a cup, or tin can or something. They'd line those up on the table, and then you see you'd go around, and the guy in charge would measure the soup into all these bowls, or this can and so on, and everyone should be the same, see. Now, one way you can make it the same too, see, is the guy that dishes up the soup, he has the last call. He has the last one. So
He'll make sure it's even.
What?
He'll make sure it's even.
That's right. He makes sure it's even. Yeah.
What was in the soup?
Well, that soup was. They always had some alfalfa. Now that's what we not familiar, but it's high protein alfalfa, by the way. They always had some alfalfa leaves in there. They had water, and there was usually some cabbage, and a little potatoes, and a little rutabaga. But those rutabaga, potatoes, cabbage, water, and a few alfalfa leaves, that was a standard fare for soup. It's kind of watery though. See, there wasn't very. You didn't get many little pieces of tomato and so on, or potato. It was kind of a
broth.
Broth almost. See. In fact, I saw an incident there that I maybe even shouldn't tell because it was so bad. But see, when the Germans had a mess hall. The Germans had a mess hall there right by the camp, and they threw the back of the mess hall was right against our camp. So the Germans in the mess hall there, when they got through off and on, especially after preparing a meal, we knew when that was, they'd throw the slops out the window. And here all these officers would crowd around that window and just stand there, see? And then pretty soon that German, he'd open the window and throw that old slop pail out there, and then all those officers would fight for those potato peelings. And yeah, I remember that Colonel Zemke and so on. He was madder than the hornets. He said, I don't want those officers fighting over those potato slop. He says, that looks bad. He says, Gad, that's a bad thing. That Germans they're going to laugh at that. He says, I said, I don't want you fighting over that slop pail. He said, of course, Americans didn't care. They were hungry.
Yeah.
But you see, they'd pick up 2 or 3 pieces of potato peeling and take it back to the room, and they'd have something to eat.
Just hungry.
Yeah, sure. So that was one thing.
You divided up the soup then for your dinner?
Yeah, then we'd eat that. And whenever they ate something, they'd always lay down, because that's the best way to, preserve it. So they all laid down for a while. Then the men done a lot of talking. And there was always a couple guys like you and I would sit there talking about, say, the university or farming or some darn thing. And see, your experience would be different than mine in life, and so they were always kind of interesting. And then
I remember reading through a list in one of your booklets that you read, typical topics of Kriege conversation. A few good ones in there on the merits of California as a state. I guess that was a big subject of arguments.
Well, a lot of the guys were from New York, California, Texas, places like that, of course. And with nothing else to do, that's a good thing to argue about. See, or they argued about which was better than B-24 or B-17, which was better, a Chevrolet or Ford. And they argued about politics, about who was president and who was going to run him maybe, and President Roosevelt was president, and who might run against him when he dies. And
Some pretty lively arguments going on.
well, they were lively. They never got too serious. They didn't do much. And there were a lot of kind of instructional material. I mean, say you were a navigator, then I might just say, why don't we have a little class in navigation? You can teach me a little bit about navigation. See, so in this room, then there'd be 4 or 5 guys who were interested in, and you'd teach them about navigation, say celestial navigation, something like that. You could look out the window at night and see the stars and name them and how they work, so on and so forth. And then they always had little paper, see, from the back of cigarettes or the back label of a can or something, and then they'd show you how to do this navigating. Then there were other guys that talked about school, like English or something like that, teaching English. Or some would teach, see, a lot of these guys that had courses, say, in psychology or calculus or algebra or whatever it was, and then they'd teach a little course to that, class in that, to those guys in that room, see. Now, once Sunday sometimes, and there were sometimes they'd have church services on Sunday, and the Germans allowed that as long as it didn't, as long as you had it in the room. But I should say one thing about religion. Perhaps these people, see, religion was a lot different in those 50, 60 years ago than there was today. So they, there's a meeting. Now, they didn't allow that in the camp that I was at. They didn't allow big sessions like that. But that's a special meeting of some type.
From another camp?
No, it's in the same camp. Yeah, that's north, what we call North 1. That's an old section of camp there. You see the buildings are. But here the Germans have gathered everyone for some kind of a talk about being cleaner or treating the German guards properly, or that were, one thing, the Red Cross inspected the camp from Sweden. So they'd maybe call everybody together and say, well, now the Red Cross is going to inspect this camp next Monday. And the German says, we want everything to be slick and clean. And then the American colonel or general, he'd stand up and said, I agree, I want this thing to be all clean too for this. So they put on a show for this Swedish Red Cross man. And that was kind of a farce in one way. But that, you have to do something. See, being a prisoner, you're sort of on a stage in a sense. It's not quite reality. Everything is kind of just a little bit off reality. See?
Putting on a little bit of a show all the time.
It's always a little show, see, between the Germans and the Americans and their status. See, everyone knows it's going to end soon, and the Germans, Americans, they're acting on this stage. I mean, that's kind of an odd way to put it. But in many ways, that's what was happening. They knew this was temporary. So, one of these days is going to end all this. How it was going to end, they didn't know. But
well, you were just saying something about church services a minute ago, or religion.
Yeah.
If you wanted to continue on.
Well, I was going to mention this religion now. This is kind of a, today I noticed in paper and so on. Well, anytime, people ask you, what church you belong to, or what religion you are, and so on, or where you go to church. Now, to those men that were in that camp, see, they've been brought up in different culture than you have today. They were brought up in a culture that had the church, school, family, and community all in one. So, you know, everybody assumed that you had a mother and father in those days. Everybody assumed you went to church. Everybody assumed that you'd gone to school, see. Everybody assumed. Now you don't have that anymore. You might ask someone, well, you know, maybe you don't have a father and father. Maybe you go to a church way on the other side of town. Or maybe you go to school someplace. You go to school someplace where you don't know anyone. So church was never really mentioned because everyone assumed that you had a church, you were religious, and you went to church. So everyone just went to the same church, of course. It was from a small town. So religion played a different part. It played a lower sort of under than it does today. Today people are interested. Say, are you Catholic or Methodist or whatever it is? See? So that's why religion was not talked about very much, because it was understood that everyone had about the same level, just like grade school or something like that. But it's interesting, yeah. Now some religions had a few meetings, but they didn't amount to much. Didn't. Germans usually. Most of them, of course, were either Lutherans or Catholics.
Now, okay, I'm sort of getting back to our day in the life of a POW. It's after your soup, you've been laying down or something, and how would the rest of the evening progress? I guess it's...
Well, it depends upon if there's a light for a couple hours. Sometimes, I remember there was a guy by the name of Lieutenant Glass. In fact, he slept right next to me. Him and I played cards once in a while. We played, see, what's that card game called, that simple one? Well, it was kind of like rummy, you know. 10-card rummy or whatever it was. We'd made some cards and so on. And then we wouldn't have one game. We just kept a score, a constant score. Whenever we played, then we just added the score. I remember that when we started, we were going to see who could get 10,000 points first. So, you know, that takes a long time. I mean, if you just play 5 minutes one day and maybe 2 hours the next day, and then you go for a week. And by gosh, he beat me by we thought, you know, a rummy is kind of, doesn't use any brains, it's just about how the cards lay out. So I thought it should be pretty even, and it was even. At 10,000, it got to be about 9,900 against 10,000. So that's one thing.
Neck and neck.
Yeah, but we talked about different things. And then in our room, I mentioned before too, we had this program, and that was extremely important. And I think it was important for the men, because it formed a bond between those 25 guys, see? Or whatever there were.
Was this something that had been going on when you arrived there? Or,
no.
Well, how did it get started? You might want to go back and...
I started that myself.
You did?
Because I noticed that as I was working on these little books, you maybe saw the books where I made little notations. It's quite easy for one person, would say like you, to take over the conversation. In other words, you're the big wheel, you're the captain, you know a lot more than anyone else, and you want to talk all the time and talk and talk. And here's some poor little guy down here never gets to talk. So he's just as important as you are, but he just never gets anyplace. So I thought we could really just make that fair, see, by having, and I discussed it with the men in the room, in the evening after the lights go out too, after it gets dark. Then we'd have every man say something, so that Joe Doe over here, who never said much, you know, one of those quiet guys, that he'd be able to say as much as Bill over here that talked all the time. Because each one, and so we'd start that at, after it got dark, whatever time that was, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock. And then we'd just go right around the room, and each guy would say something. And one guy would talk about maybe going to navigation school. One guy would talk about going to UCLA, or one guy would talk about mining. One guy would talk about chemistry class he had, or one guy would talk about haying out in Wyoming, and one guy would talk about drilling oil wells. And, you know, every guy's got different experience. And it just would go around there like that several times. And of course, after a couple of times, maybe a couple of guys would drop out. But there was always some guy that could sing or tell jokes or.
So you would go around the whole barracks more than once?
No, just the room.
Evening?
Just the room.
Oh, the room.
Just the room. The other rooms had different little schemes too. I know I lived next to one of the rooms next to us. They were great singers. I guess there were 3 or 4 guys there that could really sing, and they'd pick these songs up in a bar, I think, or something like that. Yet I tell you, they were, of course, nothing to drink, so but they could really sing. They could really sing. Yeah.
So I imagine you really get to know the men in your room pretty well after going through that every day and
well, that's right,
talking about it yourselves.
And the guys in the room liked each other. I noticed that. They liked each other. And there was, in the whole camp that I know of, I could never recall a fist fight. Once in a while they argued. And one thing too that was kind of odd, you know, a lot of men kind of swear a lot. But I noticed whenever there was a lot of swearing, they would tell the guy to cut it out. You know, you don't like to hear people swearing, but you would think maybe in a prison camp there'd be a lot of it, but there wasn't. In fact, I went to play over in high school, at Red River High School, after I got out from prison camp. There was more swearing in that play than there was in prison camp.
So you think it was pretty important to the men to maintain a sense of
decorum
discipline
and business and quiet and respect for one another. I mean, you don't like to hear me swear, and obviously you couldn't get by with too much lying because you were all of the same generation and so on. So
eventually you found out, I suppose.
Yeah. So that's the way the evening ended that way, and then sometimes, of course, by about 11, 12 o'clock or so, then the guys got tired and they just quit talking, and then, of course, they'd go to sleep. See, maybe a couple of guys would keep on talking about some other stuff. But then, usually about 12 o'clock or so, they'd stop talking too.
Drift off to sleep.
Yeah. Now, there's one thing that I haven't heard anyone mention. But you know, when I was shot down, the day I was shot down, the sirens in Germany kept on going all the time. There was never a day or an hour or a minute when I didn't hear a siren going when I was in Germany. In fact, that siren, the sound, all of it, you know, when you lay in bed that way, see, you could hear all these sirens out there. The Germans and the British, especially the British, they were terrible. They were flying these missions over Germany at night, see. I guess just to wake up people. Flying all the time. I don't care what kind of weather it was. I think in Berlin, they bombed it every night during the war. You had a record. But they flew all over. And the sirens, I think those guys that run those sirens, they just put them on automatic and just let them go. They blew the sirens all the time. In fact, the siren was so fixed in my mind that when I got home here, like the Grand Forks, if I was sitting in office and an ambulance or something went by the street with a siren on, I could lay down and fall asleep.
It just triggered that.
It just triggered that sound triggered me. When I heard a fire engine or something like that, I could just close my eyes and fall right asleep. Right. I can't do it today, but I mean when I first got out.
I suppose it's just that constant background.
Constant background noise for those couple of years there, or a full year.
So how long was it exactly that you were in?
Well, I was there for about 9 months in prison camp.
You went in 1944?
I went in 44, and then I was, fall of 44, and then I was liberated in May of 45. Yeah. We had in that camp at night too, now it's getting kind of interesting. That camp, we had a newspaper.
Oh, yeah?
And this newspaper come out about 8 o'clock or so. And it was the best doggone newspaper I ever read in my life. It was on onion skin, 1 page, single type, and it contained the see, every country has official news that they broadcast at 12 o'clock at night, incidentally. every country broadcast, 12 o'clock at night, they broadcast the news for the past day to all their embassies over the world. That's what they call the official war communique. And that newspaper copied them, had them in full. British, American, Japanese, German, Italian, French, Canadian. It copied all the official war communiques from all the countries of the world every day and sent that out in the newspaper. So we knew exactly what was going on in the world. The poor Germans didn't.
You had radios there in camp too?
Well, yes. Now, the prisoners said that this was all hidden. See, Germans were always looking for these radios. See, but I know in my heart that those Germans, they knew exactly all about that radio setup, and all these. They were all newspaper men running it, of course. I mean, they've been shot down. But the Germans were more interested in news than we were. So they were just faking it all the time. They were faking this. You're looking for this radio, or going to throw this guy that if they found the newspaper, they're going to throw him in jail and so on. But I know those Germans. They knew it all. They knew about just what they knew. They were the ones that subsidized the whole thing.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that the prisoners knew more about what was going on in the war than the German guards.
Oh, yeah.
And that was because you were able to get those
the
radio
German guards were always asking us how the war was going. And when people were shot down, they'd come into camp. They didn't know how the war was going. They were just all confused. We knew how it was going and where they had been. We knew where they'd probably been shot down, when, and what mission and so on, what they were bombing and all this and that. Prisoners knew all that stuff. Because they had that newspaper.
Now, we've seen, you mentioned the radios, and we've also seen photographs taken in the camp. There were some prisoners actually had cameras.
Well, those cameras, the Germans had the camera, but we could bribe or barter. I mean, better word. The Germans used cigarettes and cigarettes and soap. Cigarettes and soap were the two things they didn't have. Well, they didn't have coffee and a lot of things, but they would sell their soul for cigarettes and for soap. So we'd get parts of radio and parts of camera or film and all that stuff. They'd smuggle that into camp. Now, of course, that was the Germans didn't like that. They were always condemning their guards for don't talk to the prisoners, don't fraternize with the prisoners, or don't trade or anything like that. And of course, the Americans were saying the same thing. Don't talk to the German guards. Don't trade anything for, don't do this. But that trading and junk was going on all the time. Of course, the prisoners didn't have much to trade. I mean, there wasn't much to give except little information.
I understand you pretty much had to make do with just whatever objects you were able to scrape up, and you were able to make all the things you needed, all your tools out of different food containers or scraps of whatever. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, these guys, first of all, these guys were, when you get about 25 guys like that in a big barracks, you got 250 guys. They can do anything. Now, the cans, there was food, when a food come in a can like that, see, they'd obviously eat some food. There was a little can of Spam once in a while, or very seldom, sugar or whatever it was. Then they'd take that can, and then they'd strip the can, they'd take the covers off and so on, take the lead out of the seal and straighten the can out. And when it was straightened out like that, they could build things with it. They could build a stovepipe, they could build a can, they could build a pan to heat water in, or they could build a pan to cook with. And that clim there, that's a very popular can. That was a can that the powdered milk come in. And that can, the way it was built, you could make almost anything out of it. It was kind of a flat can, about what a pound of coffee would come in. In fact, kind of an interesting story about that Klim can. They used to sell that in the stores, but they don't sell it anymore in the United States. But a friend of mine went over on a tour to Africa, one of these tours to see those animals in Africa. And there at a store, he found a Klim can. So he wrote to the president of the company, Borden's, and they make the can in England now. So he wrote to them, and they sent him a case of those Klim cans to this guy in Scottsdale, Arizona. That's where he lives now. I was going to get it.
Excuse me a moment, your mic's about to fall off. I'm just going to straighten that out for you.
So those cans, they were very good. They could be used a lot. They're very pliable. And you see, to cut it, we had a knife, and made a knife out of some metal. And then on the table, there were boards on the table, 1x6s, and we split those apart, and then we'd drive a nail in there, in between the boards, and put a hole in that knife, and then close the thing up so that the knife would act as a cutter. See, then you could lay that piece of tin on there, and you just cut it just any way you wanted to. You know, make strips out of it, or cans, or anything you want. Just a regular.
It all sounds pretty ingenious.
Oh yeah, they made all kinds of junk. They made clocks, and they made cans, and they were working on all kinds of stoves and forges, and making wings. And I don't think I have any wings here, but they made a lot of stuff. And
well, there's a cigarette lighter there.
there's a cigarette lighter that's made out of a shell. I traded that. A British guy had that. He's got a British. There's on the end of that. There's a British coin, and that's a 50 millimeter shell there, empty one. He took the insides out, and then he made a cigarette lighter out of it.
Also,
And there's a button on the other end.
I understand you also made your own set of prisoner wings, insignia?
Yes.
How did you manage to do that? Did you have to melt the metal?
You had to melt. You had to get that. You had to take those tin cans from not only from your room, but maybe you had to go and scrounge tin cans from whenever they had any. If they got any tin cans around, you'd try and get them all. Mm-hmm. And then you'd scrape the metal. That lead. See, they were lead. I don't know if they use lead. I don't know if they can use lead in cans now. It's
Not
dangerous.
anymore, no.
No, but they had lead in the cans, and then you scrape that off, or you make a little fire, and you could melt the lead. Well, there's the guy there. Yeah.
Yeah, could you describe what's going on there? Is that?
Yeah, they got a little forge there. I can't, but you can see there's sort of a pot there where there's heat, and the guy's got there's a little some piping there where he's got a fan, and he's got some heat there, some coal, and then he's melting that lead, and that lead after he makes that lead it gets to be a liquid form, then he can pour that into a mold. See, that where the camp was built, there was a real sandy soil. It made good, fine sand, and then he'd make a mold of some type. They'd make wings and kernels, emblems and captain's bars, and I liked the wings myself. Mm-hmm. And then he'd make those and pour that metal in that mold. See. Wow. And then a mold too. I molded, I was the first lieutenant. I had first lieutenant bars that molded and put them on. And
did they, when you were captured, did the Germans remove all of your rank insignia?
In this case, yes, they did. Now, it depends upon what the policy was at the time you were shot down. Mm-hmm. When I was shot down, the policy was when we got to this here camp where the picture was taken, that reception camp, what they call it. Then the policy was that anything with USA on it or US on it was taken away from you. Anything that belonged with government property, they confiscated. So they took that. They took my wings and they took my dog tags. They took. I remember part of my shoes. I had my pants and shirt left, and that jacket. They took that jacket too. Finally.
Anything with USA.
Anything with USA. So that's all the flying clothes were taken. See, if they had USA on it, or US. If it didn't have that on, they left it. Another strange thing too, they took. They took. I can't remember what it was, but I guess it was some of those stuff I had in my pocket. I don't know, a little scissor or knife, and then they made a big form. And they had a form there. They had to sign that, and they signed it. So I put all this stuff in a sealed envelope, and then they told me I was to get it back after the war. See, well, obviously, of course, it didn't. Germans are great record keepers. Mm-hmm. Oh, they just love those records. Those 3x5 cards and sheets and so on. That's their whole life, I'll tell you, those Germans.
I want to jump ahead a little bit towards the end of your stay in the prison camp, and you've written. Oh, here. We'll take a look at this briefly. This is your little journal that you kept while you were in camp. And I recall reading some of your descriptions of the atmosphere in camp towards the end of the war, when the Russians were closing in, the Germans, when it was pretty much certain it was just a matter of time. And to me, that seems like that might have been a really tense period, because the Germans are your jailers, but they're also protecting you. You're under their protection in a way. So when that all starts to break down, did you ever feel like you were ever in danger at that point?
Well, I think here, I never felt in danger or in fear, but I felt in apprehension just about all the time.
Yeah.
See, there's a certain amount of security when there's 10,000 men with you. But then there's also a certain amount of apprehension, because, you know, they could wipe out 10,000 men in a hurry, too. So I was always a little apprehensive. Now, we didn't know whether the camp was going to be bombed or not, so one of the things we did at the end was dig trenches and dig foxholes for everybody. But I was apprehensive. Yes.
Could you describe how, maybe the last week before the Russians arrived, or when did you first, when did you know the Russians were coming? The Germans were still there, but you knew that it was maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, but it was going to happen soon?
Well, first of all, I knew it was coming to an end, because there was a phenomena where I lived, where that camp was, that we could see at night about, at least 150 miles. Now, the curvature of the Earth is such that it's impossible, to see that far. But I'm thinking east now, looking east. Well, in the room we were at, I could look east, and we could see the Russian line, artillery now. About the far end was about 150 miles away, and the closest was about 100. And that Russian artillery, they were firing literally train loads, not boxcar loads, but train loads of ammunition every hour as they moved over Poland and into Germany. So we knew the war was coming to an end. And then you see we had all these broadcasts at night of the newspaper. We could tell what towns were falling. This fell, that fell, that fell. And then we kept these maps up, so we could tell it was coming closer and closer. Well, finally it come that, by the way, those lights, you know, little tiny Christmas tree lights that blink? Yeah, that's the way the artillery was 100 miles away. Just a little tiny, when you see the blinking of the light of those Christmas trees about 10 blocks away, you just barely sense the little light blinking. That's the way the artillery shells of the Russians looked at night. Just barely, but it was just steady, just a tiny, tiny blinking all the time, because they were dumping trainloads of ammunition. But the line was coming closer every day.
How were the Germans in the camp responding? Did you notice a big difference?
Very restless, very restless. And we'd kind of kid them a little bit, but I didn't kid. But when the Russians were getting closer, the Americans didn't do any kidding, because they were nervous. They'd say, well, you know, like maybe there'd be a big bombardment about 50 miles away that night, and we could hear it real clear. And the German would say, well, boy, we sure knocked those Russians out last night. Did you hear the noise? And I'd just say yes. I mean, I knew it was the other way around. He did too, but he didn't say anything.
So they were trying to keep a game face, even though they...
That's right. They were playing the game too, see. By the way, at night that way, I saw one strange thing. I should tell you because it was interesting. Near Stettin, well, no, Strasbourg, well, about 25 miles away, there was a refinery, an oil refinery, a big one. And these, about the 1st of March, or so, well, middle of February, the English bombers bombed that refinery. And they bombed by flying their planes about 1 minute apart. So that the stream is about 4 hours or so. And they come with those Lancaster bombers, and they flew over this here. First come, the mosquitoes come, a fighter, and they flew over this refinery, and they dropped a red flare right over the center of it. Then the next fighter come along, and he drew a yellow line right around that flare. The next fighter come around, and he dropped a series of green flares around there. Then another one would come and drop another red one. Then the fighters would disappear. Then the bombers would start. There was the target on the ground.
Big bullseye. Huh?
A great big bullseye. And man, those Germans were shooting up then, you see, firing. And what was really spectacular is when a shell hit one of those bombers, and the bombs, you know, they hadn't dropped their bombs, so there that great big plane, clear blue sky, would explode up in the air there. And then all these parts would rain down over the target's areas. And the next one would come. And sometimes they'd hit the plane, and the plane would dive, would just lose control, dive into one of these, say, 500-barrel or 50,000-barrel tanks of high oxygen, would dive into it and explode with those 10,000 pounds of bombs in there. Boy, I tell you, there was an explosion there that reached up, you know, 40, 50,000 feet. They just kept on going there for hour after hour after hour. But I often thought of it, you know, that was the most spectacular sight I've ever seen in my life. Yeah.
So when did how did it finally come about? The Russians, did they overtake the camp?
Well, the Russians were coming, and we could see them. Of course, you could really hear them. Then a noise, there's a rumbling. That artillery far away sounds like thunder. It just sounds like that all the time. Then pretty soon, they were within about 10 miles. Then everything was getting very, very closed up. The people in town were starting to move, and I could hear people hollering and dogs barking. And then, about that time, when they were about 5 miles or so, the German guards disappeared. All the Germans disappeared, and they went into a room and they went into another building off the bank and surrendered to the Americans. Now, so that's kind of beside the point of it.
The German guards all surrendered to the American prisoners?
To the American prisoners, yeah. Yeah. Of course, they knew that anyway. I mean, see, the Americans were really in charge of the prison in the last months. But you see, the guards kept this face on, you know, of marching around.
Going through the motions.
Going through the motions, and the prisoners went through the motions of being prisoners.
You've got some pictures of the prisoners in foxholes.
Yeah, that's the foxholes we dug right there in the last week or so because we didn't know whether there were going to be bombs and so on. It was easy to dig in there. It's kind of sandy and dug right down. But as the Russians come closer, I was writing in my book what was happening kind of and it was real dramatic. I tell you, just like the night it happened now. It was kind of misting, and it was clear. I mean, not clear, but I could hear. It wasn't any wind. And I could hear the people in town leaving. But I heard they were shooting. Like I'd hear a dog barking, and then I'd hear a shot. No more barking. But that's about a mile away. And then there were explosions here and there around in the area. These were German military installations that were being blown up. And you could smell that smoke. Then the Russians were coming closer, and we didn't know just what was going to happen. Then I can recall, this was real strange. Because I wrote down a lot of this because I knew I was going to forget it. But I heard a sound in the far end of the camp, about a quarter mile away. And I heard a roar. And that roar just kept on growing and growing. And it finally hit that camp where we were at, and it said, "The Russians are here." And the camp just exploded. And it was a strange thing. These prisoners were so happy, and they turned into a mob, just a wild mob. They lost whatever anyone said to them, they would do it. They lost their own conscience of what was going. And they'd run up to the various prisoners, they'd wrap their arms around them and kiss them and hug them. Didn't ever seen the guy before in their life. And then they started dancing. They started dancing, and that was funny. This camp had kind of a big rectangular open space, as you saw there. And these guys, they built a fire in the middle of the camp. Some guys, you know, they tried some tables or chairs or some junk. They built a fire. And as that fire grew, my gosh, those prisoners just got funny. They got absolutely wild. They started dancing around that fire. They sneak danced around the fire. And they made 3 lines, 3 circles. And they sang songs. And they didn't know they were doing it. I know the prisoners didn't know they were doing it. I watched them real close. They didn't know that they were dancing around that fire.
Just spontaneous, huh?
Spontaneous. And they danced until they fell. And as they got dizzy and they walked out of the ring and they fell down on the ground. They laid there. It was. I've never seen a mob. Of course, I didn't know what a mob was before. But see, you lose your sense of personality in the mob. You then become what the people are doing. You see, you become part of the scene. And this dancing was part of the scene. And I remember one of the songs they sang. They sang it 1,000 times. Was the Beer Barrel Polka. I don't know why they sang. They had other songs too, but I didn't know them. But I saw them dancing around that fire, and that fire was strange. See, that fire excited them some way, and they threw all kinds of junk in there, shutters and I saw the guys. It's hard to believe, but they tore down these fence. They tore down these light poles where the guard tower, you know. They tore down those poles, telephone poles, highline poles. They tore them out of the ground, those guys, and threw them on this fire. And it went on for maybe about 5 hours.
And then did the Russians?
I didn't see the Russians.
They arrived the next morning?
No, they were there that night.
Oh.
They come that night in a tank, and they drove through the gate. You know.
Knocked it down?
Just right. Now the Russians were tough, I tell you.
So was that the roar that you heard earlier?
That was the roar.
The tank?
Was the tank and the people hollering. The people hollering. That was people hollering. When that tank hit that front gate, they I don't know if it was actually the front gate or wherever it was, but they just drove right through it. And those prisoners, the next day, there wasn't a sound in camp. They'd all lost their voice. But anyway, there was a strange thing about them. Of course, I didn't see any Russians that night. But a couple of days later, the Russians were kind of tough. But behind this Russian force, now the Russian army itself was well developed. They had these Cossacks. I don't know if you ever heard about them.
The horse went on horseback and swords and everything?
And they had their wife on the back, see?
Oh.
On this horse. And anyone who couldn't speak Russian, if they didn't like them, they just shot them. I mean, for a reason. I mean, give me your watch, or give me if you had a watch, or I want some whiskey, or they'd indicate that they wanted something, your coat or something, your jacket. Well, if you didn't give it to them, they just shot you.
Pretty tough customers. Huh?
Oh gosh, they were tough. In fact, Russians were afraid of them. They come after the main Russian army. So then after 2 or 3 days, of course, the things kind of settled down, and I remember we were kind of starved, so they had us go out and get a bunch of cattle and bring in there, and then we butchered them in camp and ate them and so on. And then they went and got some food supplies, took over the bakery and food stores in Barth, and took that food out to the prisoners.
Was that the first time you'd had meat since you'd been in camp? Or?
Well, I suppose it was a little bit. I mean, you
Other than
really
just,
don't have any. No,
so,
I don't remember even eating their cow meat, because I don't know, they were supposed to butcher it and then they were supposed to heat it up or something. And, these guys would just eat it anyway. So, but it wasn't. By then I had some crackers and things and got some other food, so I wasn't that hungry to eat that there. But there was one strange thing. Kind of, I should maybe mention, it's a little kind of a strange story. But right next to us was a concentration camp, a Jewish concentration camp. I mentioned it in the book a little bit. But now, this Jewish concentration camp was doctors and lawyers. It wasn't a very big camp, maybe about 200. And they turned those guys into animals. Now there's the trick. They didn't kill them, but they turned them into animals. And they had them in the ground. Had them in the ground in holes, all these guys, for several years. And when they come out of the ground, they'd seen them out of the ground, they couldn't walk upright. They walked on their hands and feet. they didn't know their name. They didn't know how long they'd been. They didn't know anything. They were just animals. So they had to stay away from them because their physical and mental condition was terribly precarious. But a strange thing happened. One time after the war, I went to the Russian, one of these Jewish, they have these big centers where they, I don't know what you call them, you know, the Jewish, where they celebrate the Holocaust Center.
Mm-hmm.
So I went there and I talked to this guy and I said, say, what information do you have on this concentration camp at Barth, Germany? Well, the guy looked around and this Jewish guy, and he said there was no camp there, he said. So then he asked, well, could you tell me about it? And I explained a lot of it, see. Well, he said, there wasn't anything like that, he said, in World War II. So then he said, well, how do you know? Well, I said I was there. Well, yeah, that caused a lot of rumpus there with that Holocaust outfit. Yeah. But then we got it straightened out. They called me several times since that, and they finally found it. It was a camp there, see.
Oh, okay. Now, how you were liberated by the Russians?
By the Russians.
How did you get back to the Americans?
Well, after the camp was liberated, the Americans with the B-17s, there was an airfield right by our camp, well, about 10 miles away, and they flew in B-17s in one day and flew all 10,000 men out to place, well, it happened to be, I think it was Reims or near Paris and so on. And then then all of us went to a place called Camp Lucky Strike. There were 3 big camps after the war. There was where they took their liberated prisoners and others. Camp Lucky Strike, Camel, Chesterfield. Lucky Strike was the biggest, about 70,000 people there. And I stayed there for about 3 weeks to a month.
What was that like when you arrived in Lucky Strike?
Well, it was good. There was a lot of food there. The only thing, the kitchen, wasn't too big, and so after you ate, you had to go back to the end of the line again to get the next meal. You take 75,000 people, and it was 3 kitchens. Mm-hmm. Well, you had 25,000 each, and then so after you had breakfast, if you wanted dinner, then after you had breakfast, then you walk down about a mile or 2, and then to the end of the line again for the. It was kind of funny, but then everyone was happy and they were going along. So.
And how long were you there before you were?
Well, I was there
back?
for about 3 weeks, and then they put us on a ship, or as Air Force sometimes refers to them as boats, but it was a ship, a troop transport ship, and they brought us back to the United States. Everything went fine. Come back to New York, and then different places, and got back to Fort Snelling, and finally got home.
Back here to North Dakota?
Back here to North Dakota, and kind of a little bit odd. I kind of went back to North Dakota here, Fort Snelling. That's where I'd been before, so I was familiar with that place. And then took the train to Grand Forks, took the train to Lakota. Of course, the train was travel there. And then Lakota, I went to Edmore. Edmore was the closest place to Fairdale where the train service was daily. So then my wife and my folks and so on, my daughter, when I got to Edmore, then I called them and they come. And then I was standing in the street there. And they drove up in this little Dodge, and they were all there. So then the war ended, see, for me.
How did they, what was their impression when they saw you? Were you looking a little, were they surprised at your condition?
I was in pretty good shape. I had bad clothes. I had all these winter clothes that had been, but I was in pretty, I lost maybe, I don't know, 30, 40 pounds, I suppose, in camp. But you gain them back pretty fast. I suppose I was maybe 20 pounds or 25 pounds less than normal, but I was in pretty good shape. Yeah. Now a lot of guys, they weren't too good eaters. They ate too much, a lot of them. That was bad. A lot of these guys, prisoners of war, when they got out of camp, they ate too much and they died, or they got sick and a lot of disease. But I tried to be real conservative. I got sick once, and that was kind of my own fault. On that plane from our camp went to Paris, out of Paris, and when we got to the runway there was a big truck. It had grapefruit on it, grapefruit. And he gave us each a can. And I thought, gee, that's pretty nice, healthy, and they opened it up and I drank it down. I got it never instant sick in all my life. You see, I had any acid in my stomach. So that's the worst. That's the sickest I've ever been in my life when I drank that can.
Looking back on the time that you were in the camp, is there like one particular image or a story or some kind of incident or maybe even a person that you met there that you find yourself thinking of that, that maybe says a lot about your experience just in a nutshell?
Well, I think, first of all, I think, you know, a prisoner can go through prison experience. He has to have a couple things. He has to have a good stomach, let's say, to eat all that strange foods and weeds and grass and meat and rotten stuff they get. And secondly, I think you have to have a goal, something to look forward to. See, now I had my wife and my daughter. That I had never seen the daughter. I got one letter from her, from my wife in prison camp. Mm-hmm. By the way, if the letters were so rare that when you got a letter from someone like that, you passed it around to everyone to read. Mm-hmm. So by the time the letter got back to me, it wore out. But that is a letter from my wife to me. But everybody, they all. But I'm just thinking of a guy, a prisoner of war with me when he was from a farm by Fairdale, and his goal, see, was to get back to that farm. He said, I don't care what they do to me. I don't care how much punishment or what I eat or what I do. I'm going to get back to that farm. Well, in my case, I want to get back home. I want to get back to my family, to my wife, and to my child, and to my home community, see. I felt close to that community of mine.
And that's what kept you going?
That's right. That's what keeps the guy going, yeah. I wanted to get back. Now, a strange thing happened. I don't know if I mentioned before, but after I got shot down, I forgot all about the Air Force. I forgot all about the Air Force, and I thought of my family and my home and things like that. And the other guys did too, for some reason or other. You know, you'd think that you'd keep thinking back to the Air Force. I mean, the squadron, all these strange characters you knew and flew with and so on. But after you were shot down and went to prison camp and so on, I noticed that you reverted back to your home.
Sort of revert to the basics.
That's right. That's correct.
What you know the most.
And it's sort of a psychological interest just to mention that when you put in that prison camp, you know, and you get to that interrogation center for 10 days or so, you're in this little room. And that's the first time in your life that you've ever been alone. And that's a very strange feeling. Most people have never been alone in their life before. I mean, you know, in a setting where you're just perfectly alone for...
In a strange country.
Yeah, many hours after hour, and you have no outside stimulus. There's no radio, no newspaper, nobody to talk to, no lights or dark. It's just sitting there. It's the first time you've all been alone. It's a very strange thing. Yeah.
Well, we're coming close to having just a few minutes left here. I suppose about 10 minutes. But is there anything that you'd like to add? Some story that might come to mind about your time in the prison camp, just to finish off our time here today?
Well, I do think that I'm thinking of these other guys now with Camp Enemy, and I think if they didn't die, first of all, when they went on these missions on the ground or in the air, I'd say maybe about 60 to 70% of the men died. So myself and others going through prison, we were lucky. I mean, we weren't brave or stronger than them, but we were lucky. And I think those that went through it, they don't regret it. I mean, they think that made them stronger. They said that some of the guys that I talked to now said that they would do it again for their family, for their children, and for their country. Those are three things they said they'd do it for. They'd go right back to a Japanese prison camp, German prison camp, or wherever they were. They'd do the same thing again if it was for the benefit of their family, their children, or their country. And that's kind of interesting. See, and I think another thing too. They did not have these men that were prisoners of war, they didn't have the strong bitterness towards the enemy that you and I would think. See, they adapted when they're prisoner of war. You adapt to your surroundings. Even the Japanese, see, prisoner of war and Japanese. If you're a prisoner of war and Japanese, they adapted to that situation. They didn't like it. I mean, it was bad. They're beaten up, cruel, no food and everything, but they adapted to that terrible situation. If you can't adapt, you die. See?
Yeah, in fact, I'm looking at something that you wrote as part of your book, and if you don't mind, I think I'll just read a little part of this. I'll skip from through a little bit, but a few of the lines that really strike me, where you say, the prison camp in many ways is a unique testing ground. The equality among the men is pitiless and unparalleled from any other type of organization. And then you finish off with being a prisoner of war in a prisoner of war camp is a special way to participate in the affairs of one's time. The war was the common experience of my age and time. As history passes by, the least I can say is that I had a part of it. And what I get from that is that there is a sense, even though it was really a lot of horrible deprivation you went through, that was truly a unique experience, and one that, as you say in here, you felt privileged to be a part of in a way. And I think that's, I don't know if you might feel like comment about that a little bit.
Well, I think that's kind of, you know, that's sort of a summary that I wrote there. There's, you have to remember now that there are some of those guys that were in prison camp that died. A lot of them died. When they were shot down, we'll say, or captured, perhaps about 50% of those people that were captured never made the prison camp. They never made it. And we don't know what happened. There's maybe, you know, we talk about the 2,000 or so missing in Vietnam. Well, maybe in Europe, you got in Air Force and so on, Army, you got maybe 50,000 that are unaccounted for. They're just done away with. We don't know what happened to them. So I was lucky. I mean, all the prisoners of war that are living today in the United States can feel they're lucky, except those, of course, that have permanent wounds. But most of those that had bad wounds, of course, they didn't make it through the camp. I mean, they didn't make it through the war. They died, or died shortly thereafter. But those guys that lived through it, they're doing pretty good. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure how we're doing on time. 5 minutes left. Well, why don't we take a little time and talk about some of what you've been doing in recent years to document not only your experiences, but also the experiences of other men in the local area who were in prison camp, whether in World War II or Korea.
Well,
how did you get in? First of all, how did you get started doing this kind of work? I know you've been writing a lot about your own experiences for a long time.
I've written a lot of books on different things. Now, maybe one of the main things I wrote about the Great Depression. Perhaps the only great book ever written on the Great Depression. I don't know if you understand it or heard of it. You maybe heard of it back in the 20s and 30s. But that was an interesting time, and a really historic time. I wrote about that. Then I've written about other things too. Now, wrote about retarded children, retarded young adults, their mind and how they work and so on. Wrote a lot about them. I've written history books about home and so on, family. But on prisoner of war, those men are really kind of in a unique situation. First of all, they were all products of the Depression. They're not products. They don't have the background that people have today. And secondly, I had them write a book on themselves. Now that's a tricky thing. Most people hate to write books about themselves, but I had these prisoners of war write a book. It was a pamphlet. It's about 100.
Similar to this that you
put
together of your own
kind of like that.
experiences?
Yeah, I asked them.
Here, we'll just set this here, and I'll flip through
I
a
asked
few
them
pages.
about 100 questions, and I gave them a lot of leeway. And then as they answered the questions,
You got your different photographs there, and
see, when they wrote these books, they sent me the pictures and everything, and I Xeroxed them and send them back about 10, 15 copies. So after I they had them write the book about themselves, then, of course, this was really good because then they had something to give their kids and so on for Christmas, a book about themselves. Then after I'd done that, then the taping operation became more successful, and I bought a high-8 camcorder, and then I started taping prisoners of war. Now, we haven't touched on that here, but I have those tapes at home, and I thought at a time into the future, we'll incorporate those stories into other stories that we have here. So we put be nice to get all the prisoners of war stories that I have on tape into one library. See? I mean, maybe you could.
Yeah.
And I have done that, and so, of course, now we're working on this project.
But you've been working on your own memories as a prisoner of war and helping these other men through videotaping them or asking them to write books for quite a few years now. And I'm wondering what really motivates you to do all this work.
Well, first I retired, see, from the Air Force about 35 years ago. So that gives a person a lot of leeway. Then, well, I farmed for a while and taught school. And I had different experiences. So, and my dad used to write quite a bit. So, write about himself, and he wrote a real extensive biography about himself and so on. But I thought it was kind of interesting because I see these people now. They probably their father or mother or grandfather, they die, and they have no record of it. I mean, this grandfather will say maybe was one of the survivors of the Titanic and had terrific experiences all over the world. Now he's dead, but nothing was written about it. I think it's a shame not to write something about your folks or about things that happened to you. And I think, you know, I don't get the benefit of the writing, but my children, my grandchildren get a benefit, see.
So you see yourself as helping to preserve
That's
a lot
right.
of this
That's
material for
Yeah.
the future generations.
That's right, yeah. And I think I've, on the war now, of course, prisoner of war is one thing, but other things too. I've written a lot of other things about that. And I think, you know, they may not appreciate it now, but they will in years to come, see. Just like the tape we do, see. I mean, you know, you and I could look at it and it's kind of just blasé, but when it gets to the person who's involved there, to his children and so on, see, then it becomes very important, see. I mean, really, most important thing a guy ever does in his life. Yeah. Because it shows up, see.
Well, we've got maybe about a minute left. I think maybe if you've got any final comments or just a little idea you might want to go ahead and...
I think when I talk about the prisoner of war, I'm thinking of all the other guys too, see. I mean, they all did well, I think, in life, and they're a unique group of people in many ways, because they all had that basic cultural, say, status of being born, raised in the Depression, and they also come from a culture where the family, school, church, and their community were blended together into one unit, which we don't have today. See, so they had an advantage. These men had a big advantage when they started the war over what a person has today. Today he doesn't have that cohesiveness in society or in his culture that we had back there in the 20s and 30s. I think that's important.
Strong foundation.
That's right. That's right. They don't have that now. In fact, the Air Force, just as a final comment, the American government says in picking Air Force generals, the two most important things are he come from a small town or a farm. Yeah.
Well, we've certainly got that here in North Dakota. I think that's about all we have time for. So I'd like to thank you again, Elmer, for coming in and for all the great work that you've done on this. And hopefully we can put something together out of all the great videotape we've got.
Well, we got all the raw material, you see, so we're in good shape now.
Certainly. And those of you watching, I'd like to thank you for viewing this program, Kriegieland. It's been a really wonderful experience for us here at ASN to be involved in this very important work. And thanks again for taking the time to watch and to relive these stories with us.
I should say this, maybe just as a final word. I don't know if we got to take that.
No, we don't. We're going to have to
well.
just roll, I think.
Yeah.
But
Well.